He spoke and ceased, and left the earthly scene. Away from the strife and suffering on our globe, he turned towards his far-off blissful home, a brilliant arrow pointing straight to heaven. The luminous body of the eternal seer assailed the purple glory of the noon and disappeared like a receding star, vanishing into the light of the unseen.
to the last part of the Book of Fate, Canto 2, The Way of Fate and the Problem of Pain. We've come to page 460, 7 lines up from the bottom. Narad has already given most of his explanation of the nature of fate and the reason for pain and suffering in this world, a world created by the divine, a world controlled under the direction and management of the divine. Why should there be pain and suffering on such a mass scale that we see in such a world created by the divine? And Narad has given a number of different explanations for it. He began by telling how this world has emerged out of the inconscient, out of an absence of consciousness and life, where there was nothing. And he says that from that emerged pain. Pain and joy came in one cowl, he says, in one embryo, like twins. But pain came first, he says, and pain plowed the way for joy to emerge. And if it wasn't for pain and suffering, the consciousness would have never striven to emerge and be, to live. It would have just fallen back asleep into the inconscient. So pain was necessary as a spur. He also speaks of the divine incarnate taking on the burden of pain and suffering in the world for humanity. That he comes, is born into this world in a human body, suffers on the cross, in order to show mankind the way out, at the same time bringing down higher and higher levels of consciousness, opening the way for human beings to embody, partake of those higher states. He speaks of the Asura, who doesn't wait for the divine help, for the divine guidance, but strives to take control and mastery over life, over the world himself, to impose himself on existence. And that Asura, that influence, takes delight in pain and suffering, both in himself and in others. And this is another reason for the pain and suffering that we see, the influence of these Asuric beings here in the world. I was just reading yesterday something by Sri Aurobindo saying that if it were not for these asuric beings and their influence and their perverting power over life and humanity, that the evolution could have proceeded much more easily and smoothly, like the opening of a flower. This natural development and growth. But due to that influence, these anti-divine forces, which are against this efflorescence of consciousness, because they want to maintain control, their own control over life. So they also had to be defeated, or their use transcended. For the divine also has allowed their influence. And Mother says somewhere that when they're no longer needed it is the working out of truth, a gradual unfolding of the truth of existence here in the world between the soul and nature. He says it's a transaction done at every moment between the soul and nature. O King, thy fate is a transaction done at every hour between nature and thy soul, with God for its foreseeing arbiter. Fate is a balance drawn in destiny's book. Man can accept his fate. He can refuse. So we see it as this transaction being done between the soul, the representative of the divine in us, in each human being, with nature. So ultimately, our soul has power, mastery over nature. It can take up that mastery if we unite consciously with our soul. And he also speaks in this same explanation that we read last time. He used the metaphor of a marching army advancing in battle as a kind of metaphor for the evolutionary journey. But in that, he also brings in this idea that it's a collective battle, a collective work, a collective journey, that it's not just a matter of the individual soul, but we're all together in this. And then he speaks also that death and suffering These things are not the end of the journey, that ultimately the soul is advancing through many lives. Death is just a passage. The suffering that we encounter is just an incident in a long journey through many lives. And now, well, at the very end of our session last time, he begins speaking of Savitri more directly. And her role in this. And just maybe to put it in some context of the overall canto, she is now going to decide the world's fate. This matter of death and suffering that we face. She is going to confront that ultimate challenge, that ultimate fate that we endure, and to attempt to overcome that, to annihilate death, or to transform him. And he says that she alone is equal to that task. For she is that embodiment of the Divine Mother, the conscious power of the Divine Being. So he began this explanation with these lines. Queen, strive no more to change the secret will. Time's accidents are steps in its vast scheme. This line also gives us an important insight into the nature of our existence, that everything is foreseen, everything is in its place. All are necessary steps in this unfolding of the divine here in the world. He says, bring not thy brief and helpless human tears across the fathomless moments of a heart that knows its single will and God's as one. It can embrace its hostile destiny. It sits apart with grief and facing death, affronting adverse fate, armed and alone. He says, alone she is equal to her mighty task. So let's continue with this part of his explanation of her role. And perhaps, we can start with Margaret. 7 lines up from the bottom.
Intervene not in a strife too great for thee, a struggle too deep for mortal thought to sound. Its question to this nature's rigid bounds when the soul fronts nude of garbs the infinite. Its too vast seam of a lonely mortal will, pacing the silence of eternity. As a star, uncompanioned, moves in heaven, unastonished by the immensities of space, traveling infinity by its own light, the great are strongest when they stand alone. A God-given might of being is their force, a ray from self's solitude of light, the guide. The soul that can live alone with itself meets God. Its only universe is their rendezvous. A day may come when she must stand unhelped on a dangerous brink of the world's doom and hers, carrying the world's future on her lonely breast, carrying the human hope in a heart of left soul to conquer or fail on a last desperate verge, alone with death and close to extinction's edge. Her single greatness in that last dire scene must cross alone a perilous bridge in time and reach an apex of world destiny, where all is won or all is lost for men.
Thank you. So we remember that these are some of the last lines that Sri Aurobindo wrote in Savitri, just a few weeks before his passing, which he clearly knew was going to happen as he was voluntarily leaving his body. So it reminds us very much of the mother of the ashram who was to be left alone to complete their task, their mission, to bring down the supramental consciousness on earth, establish it here as the next step in the evolution, a stage in which pain and suffering and death would no longer be there for those supramental beings that would be established as the next race. So she was left with that work alone to face death on extinction's verge. She herself would have to go through death, leaving her body for a period of time in which she was hanging between life and death, battling, we don't know, the ultimate mystery of that phase, her experience. But she speaks about that in 1960, in its evolution, in its development. And with that experience, she comes back into her body to renew her fight, her work, to bring down that consciousness into her cells, into her body. Descent of the supermind into the earth consciousness she accomplished already earlier in 1956, 6 years after Sri Aurobindo left, occurring during their Wednesday meditation class in the playground, her Wednesday class where she would speak with the students, and then afterwards, during the collective meditation, this descent came. She didn't speak of it for some time to be absolutely sure that it was the decisive descent for the earth consciousness. So that was February 29th, 1956. And then she spoke of it, I think, in April of that year. Maybe announced it in the bulletin, the ashram journal. And she speaks of those intervening years of difficulty that she was facing between Sri Aurobindo's leaving of his body and that descent. A very difficult, perilous time. In fact, just a year before, 14 months to the day, she says that this next 14 months are going to be very difficult. Already she had foreseen that descent would be coming, but leading up to that was also the ultimate battle that she had to face alone. So all of that is here alluded to in these lines. Though he's speaking of Savitri.
Isn't he, of course, also speaking to us in terms of each individual soul is carrying the world redeemer's task. So each of us obviously has to stand alone at a certain point.
Yeah, that could be. We also have to face.
This is the soul's turn.
Of course, when we confront death, our soul confronts that alone. Whatever supports we may have had in our life are no longer there. We have to deal with that ourselves. And when we come to that stage where we can face and overcome death, that too we'll have to do alone.
But we have this already happened in evolution. So when we have, let's say, a very strong advantage,
Yes.
if we know this,
We have a lot of explanations by the mother about that process of death, of the consciousness of the cells, which have this long-standing habit of accepting defeat, accepting death. But she says it's not inevitable that consciousness of the divine, of the soul's mastery over nature, is there in the soul, and it can determine its fate.
I think that is an important point what you just said, because I'm reading at home also in book 3, and she Auroville in this process that he had two parts, one free up and the other struggling down. And I think for me, the awareness to be aware of this both, and then I recognize that is the important point, to know this both. The imprint that we are resting on a higher level, and in this one have we also much seen very often the film Life After Life from Raymond Moody. The people go up and are blissful and restful, then they go back. And this to understand, I think, can help very much to have the faith and to see the situation that we are in another way.
Yeah, there is a part of our consciousness, as you say, that is above all of this play of life and death. It stands above eternal, watching over it, presiding over this evolutionary journey of the soul that has descended into this ignorance and suffering and death. And to overcome, we have to unite with that higher consciousness. We have to be able to live in that freedom, that eternity of the Spirit, while maintaining this consciousness below in life, in the world. And from that poise, because it's only in that poise of the Spirit that we can have the power, or that we can open to that divine power that alone can change this lower consciousness, can alone transform death. Okay, let's continue. Sudhanya.
In that tremendous silence, lone and lost, of a deciding hour in the world's fate, in our souls climbing beyond mortal time, when she stands soul with death or soul with God, apart upon a silent, desperate brink, alone with herself and death and destiny, as on some words between time and timelessness. When being must end, or life revealed its base, alone she must conquer, or alone must fall. No human aid can reach her in that hour. No armored God stands shining at her side. Cry not to heaven, for she alone can save. For this the silent force came mission dawn. In her the conscious will took human shape. She only can save herself and save the world. O Queen, stand back from that stupendous scene. Come not between her and her hour of fate. Her hour must come and none can intervene. Think not to turn her from her heaven-sent task. Strive not to save her from her own high will. Thou hast no place in that tremendous strife. Thy love and longing are not arbiters there. Leave the world's faith and heart to God's soul guard.
Thank you. Let's pause there. Here, Sri Aurobindo, further draws this parallel with the mother and her experience and her destiny to confront death and the transformation of the world. At the same time, he brings it back kind of more clearly and strongly to the story. For the queen has been trying to dissuade Savitri from the choice of Satyavan, to turn away from this adverse fate of his death, to take an easier road, to choose someone else. But she has resisted. She has refused to do that. So he's alluding to those attempts by the queen. O queen, stand back from that stupendous scene. Come not between her and her hour of fate. Her hour must come, and none can intervene. Think not to turn her from her heaven-sent task. Strive not to save her from her own high will. Leave the world's fate and her to God's sole guard.
Would you say this is some very good advice to parents about interfering in their children's dharma? And also, there's some parallels here when we read the 1973 in the agenda. What happened to the mother at the end? How she is definitely left alone. You can see from the circumstances and what happens, and also being excluded and put away. It's a very painful.
Yeah, I feel some connection with that too, with the mother's passing. That she was also left alone, and I think there was this perhaps, attempt by others around her to intervene in some way to her own situation. So again, she was left alone to deal with her own ultimate fate.
Very grateful that you bring more deeper this struggle of the mother and sharing had left as a conquering of death or fighting with death. So far, I always had in my mind that I know that the mother's task was to overcome death somewhere. And then I recognized it when she built up the right columns so that people can easier go when they're dying to the end. That was yeah one first work she did when she was a teenager. So I thought, that was her work. But now to another dimension through reflections now, how much more challenges we face.
Yeah, Margaret's alluding to another work that the mother had done earlier in order to, let's say, ease the passage of souls following death, that they might go to the psychic world more quickly, more easily, without wandering, going astray into the vital worlds and going through a period of suffering or disturbance there. So that was something she felt also was an important work that she needed to do, was given to her.
She promised everyone who is associated with her that when we die, she will be there. Without you.
I don't know, perhaps there was something about the, I think the people in the ashram, Sri Aurobindo had, or she had seen in a vision, a symbol put on their forehead or something of Sri Aurobindo's symbol that would protect them in their passage after death. Perhaps all that turned to her, and Sri Aurobindo would have a similar kind of protection afforded them.
The work Mother did in the earlier part of her life, as she said, doing passages in Tamil schools, that time she was just acting in the paintings or things. She said anyone who has turns to anything, has a light coming and has an opening to anything divine, and a little bit of psychic contact will be the master. And the ones in the ashram, they have consciously turned to yoga and have consciously turned to doing conscious work. And someone had, as you mentioned, they asked because outward, I think Mridu or people like it was Mridu Jai sister that Mother saw. And she said that someone had asked her, how can it be possible that on this tomb Mother had asked Sri Aurobindo? Because she was shocked, even Mother was shocked because I think they had the consciousness was very low outwardly. And usually when someone has a consciousness, a state of consciousness and the kind of state they have is more into the sign. And then Sri Aurobindo had responded anybody who has a community and has worked in this, and however they are in the outer community, their souls have everything.
So he said that, you're saying?
Actually, Sri Aurobindo said this about Mridu.
Oh.
In Lord Bhavan's conversation with Isha's conversation with Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo said, yes, she also. She also. And what Mother did was that they did not have to have done conscious yoga or anything. Any soul which is slightly awake will be having that connection from now on. I think that's also when people see the film life after life from life. They can see that an openness is there, and that wants to be very quickly they know that higher level. And I think there are also from the Middle Age already a picture which shows the tunnel to the light. So when you have a positive openness to the divine, you go through. But it is still was very difficult. So what the Mother brought down on her, that was really something that the inner chamber and the abscess vein quickly go up.
Okay, let's conclude the canto in the book. Who's next? Okay.
Even if he seems to leave her to her lone strength, even though all falters and falls and sees an end, and the heart fails, and only are death and night. God-given, her strength can battle against doom, even on a brink where death alone seems close, and no human strength can hinder or can help. Think not to intercede with the hidden will. Intrude not twixt her spirit and its force, but leave her to her mighty self and fate. He spoke and ceased and left the earthly scene. Away from the strife and suffering on our globe, he turned towards his far-off blissful home. A brilliant arrow pointing straight to heaven. The luminous body of the ethereal seer assailed the purple glory of the noon and disappeared like a receding star, vanishing into the light of the unseen. But still a cry was heard in the infinite, and still to the listening soul on mortal earth, a high and far imperishable voice chanted the anthem of eternal love.
Yeah, the ending is so poignant and makes us think of both Sri Aurobindo's passing and the mother's. Even if he seems to leave her to her soul's strength. So he was leaving, even though all falters and falls and sees an end, and the heart fails, and only our death and night. God, given her strength, can battle against doom. Even on a brink where death alone seems close, and no human strength can hinder or can help. Think not to intercede with the hidden will. Intrude not twixt her spirit and its force, but leave her to her mighty self and fate. To me, that brings to mind her own end of life. And people wondered whether they were hindering Mother and her work through their actions at the end of her life. Whether they could have helped or not. But he's saying, think not to intercede with the hidden will. Whatever was to be, it suggests, was to be, was the hidden will. And then this last section makes us think of Sri Aurobindo also leaving the earthly scene. He spoke and ceased and left the earthly scene. This is referring to Narad, but it seems to apply also to Sri Aurobindo. He is giving us these last words.
The great scene here, the cinematic victory, is the background music of the chanting of the eternal love. So against that context and background, everything fits together.
Where is the scene?
The scene is, you see, he's disappearing into the light. It's this, I put it in movie terms.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's off into the sunset or the dawn. But something is happening there. He's chanting the anthem of eternal love. So that's how he ends this brilliant canto. Our faith ends, no matter what all this stuff is happening. The thing that's supporting it all is the eternal love. And it's being sung, it's vibrationally in reality. So this is such a powerful thing, I think, for us.
Yeah.
Because there is that booklet, I think they published it here, called But It Is Done, where they took the words from the agenda, I think, where the mother said, it's all done. And they only need some, we need, and the Spirit says, we need the cooperation. The mother asks, who's we? And then the Spirit answers her, we includes the Ordeal. That beautiful booklet. I think that would be the wrong one. It was Kiri Joshi and Joji make that show how this supernatural action was actually rooted here and using what the mother said from the agenda to help establish principle.
Yeah, we're left to carry out this work and enact this transformation here. Aurovillians and the others around the world that have been touched. But yeah, he brings back in this final line this theme of love of the divine, which is the whole theme of Savitri as a whole. It's this love which ultimately saves, brings back the creation to the divine. And it's beautiful that that was the mother's experience when she was kind of leaving her body, and she comes back with these great pulsations of this divine love, carrying the evolution forward, she says. That's the anthem, the chanting of the anthem. which is there behind all of this, supporting it and carrying it. So ultimately, that's our destiny. And that's the solution to the problem of pain and death. So let's continue. We'll start reading in Book 7, the Book of Yoga, Canto 1, the joy of union, the ordeal of the foreknowledge of death, and the heart's grief and pain. So we come back now to Savitri and Satyavan and the beginning of their married life. She carrying this foreknowledge of his impending death, keeping that within her heart, secret from him and his family, carrying that burden. Okay, we continue. Come.
Fate followed her foreseen immutable road. Man's hopes and longings built the journeying wheels that bear the body of his destiny and lead his blind will towards an unknown goal. His fate within him shapes his acts and rules. Its face and form already are born in him. Its parentage is in his secret soul. Here matter seems to mold the body's life, and the soul follows where its nature drives. Nature and fate come to its issue the long cosmic curve. Once more she sat behind loud hastening hooves, a speed of armored squadrons and a voice far heard of chariots bore her from her home. A couchant earth vacant in its dumb muse looked up at her from a vast indolence, hills wallowing in a bright haze, large lands that lolled at ease beneath the summer heavens, region on region spacious in the sun, cities like chrysolites in the white blaze, and yellow rivers pacing lion-maned, led to the Shalva marches emerald line, a happy front to marches emerald line, a happy front to iron vastnesses and austere peaks and titan solitudes.
Thank you. Come down.
Once more was near the fair and fated place, the borders gleaming with the grove's delight, where first she met the face of Satyavan, and he saw, like one waking into a dream, some timeless beauty and reality. The moon gold sweetness of heaven's earth-born child. The past receded, and the future neared. Far now behind lay Madra's spacious halls, the white carved pillars, the cool dim alcoves, the tinct mosaic of the crystal floors, the towered pavilions, the wind-rippled pools, and gardens humming with the murmur of bees. Forgotten soon, or a pale memory, the fountain splash in the white stone-bound pool. The thoughtful noon-tide's brooding solemn trance. The colonnades dream grey in the quiet eve. The slow moonrise gliding in front of night. Left far behind were now the faces known. The happy silken babble on laughter's lips, and the close clinging clasp of intimate hands, and adoration's light in cherished eyes, offered to the one sovereign of their life. Nature's primeval loneliness was here. Here only was the voice of bird and beast. The ascetic's exile in the dim souled huge, inhuman forest, far from cheerful sound of man's blithe converse and his crowded days.
Thank you. B.
In a broad eve, with one red eye of cloud, through a narrow opening, a green-flowered cleft, out of the stare of sky and soil they came, into a mighty home of emerald dusk. There, onward led, by a faint, brooding path which toiled through the shadow of enormous trunks, and under arches, misers of sunshine. They saw low thatched roofs of a hermitage huddled beneath a patch of azure hue. In a sunlit clearing that seemed the outbreak of a glad smile in the forest's monstrous heart, a rude refuge of the thought and will of man, watched by the crowding giants of the wood. Arrived in that rough-hewn homestead, they gave, questioning no more the strangeness of her fate, their pride and loved one to the great blind king, a regal pillar of fallen mightiness, and the stately, careworn woman, once a queen, hoped nothing for herself from life, but all things only hoped for her one child, calling on that single head from partial fate, all joy of earth, all heaven's beatitude. Adoring wisdom and beauty like a young god's, she saw him loved by heaven as by herself. She rejoiced in his brightness and believed in his fate, and knew not of the evil drawing near.
Thank you.
Lingering some days upon the forest verge, like men who lengthen out departure's pain, unwilling to separate sorrowful, clinging hands, unwilling to see for the last time a face, heavy with the sorrow of a coming day, and wandering idle hands, her supreme works, they parted from her with pain-fraught, burdened hearts. As forced by inescapable fate, we part from one whom we shall never see again. Driven by the singularity of her fate, helpless against the choice of Savitri's heart, they left her to her rapture and her doom in the tremendous forest savage charge. All put behind her that was once her life, all welcomed that henceforth was his and hers. She abode with Satyavan in the wild woods. Priceless she deemed her joy, so close to death. Apart with love, she lived for love alone. As if self-poised above the march of days, her immobile spirit watched the haste of time, a statue of passion and invincible force, an absolutism of sweet imperious will, a tranquility and the violence of the gods, indomitable and immutable.
Thank you.
At first to her beneath the sapphire heavens, the sylvan solitude was a gorgeous dream, an altar of the summer's splendor and fire, the sky-topped, flower-hung palace of the gods, and all its scenes a smile on rapture's lips, and all its voices bards of happiness. There was a chanting in the casual wind. There was a glory in the least sunbeam. Night was a cry of praise on velvet cloth, a nestling darkness or a moonlit deep. Day was a purple pageant and a hymn, a wave of the laughter of light from morn to eve. His absence was a dream of memory. His presence was the empire of a god, a fusing of the joys of earth and heaven, a tremulous blaze of nuptial rapture past, a rushing of two spirits to be one, a burning of two bodies in one flame. Opened were gates of unforgettable bliss. Two lives were locked within an earthly heaven, and fate and grief fled from that fiery hour. But soon now failed the summer's ardent breath, and throngs of blue black clouds crept through the sky, and rain fled sobbing over the dripping leaves, and storm became the forest titan's voice. Then, listening to the thunder's fatal crash, and the fugitive pattering footsteps of the showers, and the long unsatisfied panting of the wind, and sorrow muttering in the sound-vexed night, the grief of all the world came near to her. Night's darkness seemed her future's ominous face.
Thank you. I'll read one section. The shadow of her lover's doom arose, and fear laid hands upon her mortal heart. The moments swift and ruthless raced. Alarmed, her thoughts, her mind remembered Narad's date. Trembling, moved accountant of her riches, she reckoned the insufficient days between. A dire expectancy knocked at her breast. Dreadful to her were the footsteps of the hours. Grief arms, out of her sleep it rose at morn to look into her face. Vainly she fled into abysms of bliss from her pursuing foresight of the end. The more she plunged into love, that anguish grew. Her deepest grief from sweetest gulfs arose. Remembrance was a poignant pang she felt each day a golden leaf torn cruelly out from her too slender book of love and joy. Would you like to read? Okay.
Thus, swaying in strong gusts of happiness, and swimming in foreboding sombre waves, and feeding sorrow and terror with her heart, for now there sat among her bosom's guest, or in her inner chamber, paced apart. Her eyes stared blind into the future's night. Out of her separate self, she looked and saw, moving amid the unconscious faces loved. In mind a stranger, though in heart so near, the ignorant smiling world go happily by, upon its way towards an unknown doom, and wondered at the careless lives of men. As if in different worlds they walked, though close, they confident of the returning sun, they wrapped in little hourly hopes and tasks. She in her dreadful knowledge was alone. The rich and happy secrecy that once enshrined her as if in silver bower, apart in a bright nest of thoughts and dreams, made room for tragic hours of solitude and lonely grief that none could share or know, a body seeing the end too soon of joy and the fragile happiness of its mortal love. Her quiet visage still and sweet and calm, her graceful daily acts were now a mask. In vain she looked upon her depths to find a ground of stillness and the spirit's peace.
Thank you. Let's stop there for today.
He spoke and ceased, and left the earthly scene. Away from the strife and suffering on our globe, he turned towards his far-off blissful home, a brilliant arrow pointing straight to heaven. The luminous body of the eternal seer assailed the purple glory of the noon and disappeared like a receding star, vanishing into the light of the unseen.
Thanks to Sri Aurobindo.